Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a journey way back, late Jurassic period. We're exploring the world of Barosaurus, the heavy lizard.
That's right. And we've got some great source material, scientific papers, discovery accounts, museum info, really digging into what made this giant tick.
Exactly. Our mission really is just to pull out the most fascinating bits about this colossal plant eater. What makes it so compelling?
Well, heavy lizard is a pretty good start, isn't it? Says a lot right there.
Okay, heavy lizard. Let's unpack that. Barosaurus. It definitely sounds weighty, and that's exactly what its discoverer, Othniel Charles Marsh, was going for in 1890.
Yeah. Berries, heavy in Greek, Sauros lizard. Simple as that.
So heavy lizard. And this thing was a major player back in the late Jurassic, right? Specifically the Kimmeridgian age.
Correct. We're talking roughly 155 to 148 million years ago. A long, long time. And it roamed a pretty wide area.
Where exactly have we found its fossils?
Mostly in the Morrison Formation. That's a huge geological layer you find across places like Colorado, Utah, South Dakota, eastern Wyoming. Includes famous spots like Como Bluff.
Right, Como Bluff. Classic dinosaur territory. Now, size. That's the big thing with Barosaurus, isn't it? I mean, just how big are we talking?
Oh, immense. Your typical adult was probably somewhere between 25 and 27 meters long. That's, what, 82 to 89 feet?
89 feet.
And weighing maybe 12 to 20 metric tons. So 13 to 22 short tons. A serious amount of animal.
That's already huge. But I read something about potentially even bigger individuals. Is that right?
Ah, yes. That's where things get really interesting and, well, a bit debated. There's this one truly massive vertebra, BYU 9024. It's enormous.
BYU 9024.
Okay. And some researchers, like Mike Taylor, have argued pretty convincingly that it might belong to Barosaurus, even though it was initially thought to be Supersaurus.
Wow. Okay, so if that bone is from a Barosaurus, what does that mean for its size? How big could it have gotten?
Well, if Taylor's interpretation holds up, you could be looking at an animal stretching maybe 48 meters. That's 157 feet.
157 feet.
And weighing maybe 66 tons. It would be absolute record-breaking. It forces us to rethink, the upper limits for land animals back then. That one bone hints at a neck possibly over 15 meters long itself.
15 meters.
Right.
Just the neck? That's almost unbelievable. But you said it's debated. What's the counter-argument? Why Supersaurus?
Right. Other paleontologists, like Brian Curtis, look at the shape, the morphology of that vertebra and the geology where it was found, and they argue it fits better with Supersaurus. It really shows how paleontology works, doesn't it? You've got evidence, but interpretations can differ. Science evolves as we re-examine things.
Absolutely, a proper prehistoric mystery.
Yeah.
But even setting aside BYU 9024 for a moment, there's other evidence for huge Barosaurus, isn't there? You mentioned some other neck bones.
Yes, exactly. There's another find, a series of 3 super long neck vertebrae, BYU 3GR and BYU 2015. One of them is over a meter long on its own.
Over a meter for a single neck bone.
Yeah, between 1110 and 1220 millimeters. So by comparing these to smaller, more complete Barosaurus fossils, researchers estimate the neck of that individual could have been somewhere between 12 and 15.1 meters long.
12 to 15 meters. Again, just for the neck. That's staggering.
Think about it, a neck as long as an articulated bus.
So even without the potentially record-breaking vertebra, we're definitely looking at an animal with an extraordinary neck. What's the estimated total body length based on that neck?
Well, a neck that long strongly suggests an overall body length somewhere around 40 meters, about 130 feet. So yeah, debate or no debate on the single huge bone, Barosaurus was undeniably one of the longest dinosaurs out there.
And its build was different from its relatives, right? Not just a scaled-up Diplodocus.
Precisely. That's a key point. While Barosaurus and Diplodocus might have been similar in, say, total length, their proportions were distinct. Barosaurus had that proportionally longer neck, but actually a shorter tail.
Longer neck, shorter tail. Interesting.
And compared to Apatosaurus, it was longer, but generally less robust, maybe a bit more slender. These aren't just random variations. They likely point to different lifestyles, different feeding strategies, perhaps.
Okay, so we've got the scale, the proportions. Let's dig into the anatomy itself. What makes a Barosaurus bone identifiable? What are the key skeletal features?
Well, we don't have a complete spine, unfortunately, but we can tell a lot from the vertebrae we do have. One big difference is the neck vertebrae count.
Right, you mentioned Diplodocus and Apatosaurus had 15.
Yeah, 15.
Yeah.
But the evidence points towards Barosaurus likely having 16.
16, how?
The thinking is that maybe one of its trunk vertebrae right behind the neck kind of got converted. It evolved to function like a neck vertebra. That extra segment really adds to that incredible neck link.
An extra link in that super long chain.
Yeah.
Were the individual vertebrae just more numerous or different in shape too?
Oh, they were different. Significantly longer. Some Barosaurus neck vertebrae could be up to 50% longer than the equivalent bone in Diplodocus.
50% longer.
Imagine the reach that gives you. Sweeping side to side, covering a huge feeding area without moving that massive body.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But was there a trade-off?
Seems like it. Those bony projections sticking up from the top of the vertebrae, the neural spines, they were less tall and less complex in Barosaurus compared to the elaborate ones you see in Diplodocus. Suggests maybe different neck muscle arrangements.
Okay, longer, but maybe simpler construction in some ways?
Yeah.
What about the tail? You said it was shorter.
Yeah, compared to the neck, definitely shorter overall than Diplodocus because the individual tail vertebrae were shorter, but it's still thought it probably tapered down into that classic Diplodocus whiplash tail.
A whiplash tail.
Yeah, possibly with up to 80 vertebrae in total. A long, thin whip at the end.
So long sweeping neck, shorter whiplash tail, distinctive shape. Any other unique bits in the tail bones?
Well, those chevron bones, the V-shaped ones underneath the tail vertebrae, in Barosaurus, they had a distinct forked shape with a spike pointing forwards. That's something it shared specifically with Diplodocus, a good clue to their close relationship.
Right. Moving down now the legs. Supporting all that weight must have required some serious engineering. What were its limbs like?
Pretty similar in basic design to Diplodocus, actually. Both were quadrupedal, obviously, with those thick column-like legs needed to hold up tons of weight.
Pillar legs, classic sauropod look.
Exactly. But here's an interesting difference. Barosaurus seems to have had proportionately longer forelimbs compared to other diplodocids.
Longer front legs, really.
Yeah, proportionally. Though keep in mind, its forelimbs were still shorter than its hind limbs, which is typical for most sauropods. Just less of a difference than in some others.
Subtle, but interesting. And the hands and feet, how did it stand?
Okay, so in the wrist, we know it had just a single carpal bone. And the metacarpals, the hand bones, were a bit more slender than in Diplodocus.
And the feet themselves, have we found any?
Sadly, no complete Barosaurus feet yet, but looking at its relatives, we can make some good guesses. Probably digitigrade walking on its toes.
On its toes. Like a cat or dog.
Sort of, yeah. Not flat-footed like us. And based on relatives, it likely had a big claw on the thumb, the inner digit of the forefoot.
For traction. Or defense.
Could be either or both. And then probably smaller claws on the inner three toes of the hind foot. That's the typical pattern we see.
Gotcha. Okay, the big missing piece then. The head. Do we have any idea what its skull looked like?
That is still the million-dollar question, unfortunately. No definitive Barosaurus skull has ever been found. It's a major gap.
Frustrating.
It is. But we can look at close relatives like Apatosaurus and Diplodocus, whose skulls are well known. Based on them, we hypothesize Barosaurus likely had a similar long, low skull, maybe a bit horse-like in profile, with slender jaws and peg-like teeth clustered right at the front. Good for stripping leaves off branches, probably not much chewing involved.
Peg teeth for stripping. Makes sense for a giant herbivore. So we're constantly comparing it to its relatives. Let's talk about those family ties. Where does Barosaurus sit on the dinosaur family tree?
Right. It's firmly placed within the sauropod family Diplodocidae. That's the family known for those super long necks and tail.
With a classic long neck.
Exactly. And within that family, Barosaurus is usually put in the subfamily Diplodocinae, sometimes right alongside Diplodocus, highlighting just how closely related they likely were. These relationships are worked out through phylogenetic analyses, comparing lots of detailed bone features.
Yeah. So what defines the whole Diplodocidae family? What makes them different from, say, Brachiosaurs or Titanosaurs?
Well, the key features include those incredibly long tails, often with more than 70 vertebrae. Also, their forelimbs are distinctly shorter than their hind limbs compared to many other sauropod groups, and specific skull features, even though, as we said, the Barosaurus one is missing.
Okay, and within that Diplodocinae subfamily, who else is in the club with Barosaurus and Diplodocus?
Good question. Besides Diplodocus, its closest kin probably include Torniaria africana, which, interestingly, was once thought to be an African species of Barosaurus.
Oh.
Yeah. Also, various species of Supersaurus, Linkopol, Gallimiopus, and Cathtodocus, It's quite a lineup of long-necked giants. And remember, Barosaurus lentus is the only species currently recognized in its genus.
A big family. And the other main branch of Diplodocidae.
That would be the Apatosaurinae. And as the name suggests, that includes Apatosaurus, and also, interestingly, Supersaurus is sometimes placed there too. So relationships can be complex.
Definitely sounds like it. Geographically, where did these diplodocids live? Was Barosaurus just a North American thing?
While Barosaurus itself seems mostly North American, the Diplodocidae family was more widespread. We found fossils in Europe and Africa too. They were clearly a successful group during the late Jurassic.
Okay.
What's also interesting is that the more distantly related families within the larger Diplodoctoidea group, like the Dicraeosaurids and Rubicosaurids, they seem to be mainly found in the southern continent's Gondwana.
Fascinating distribution. Okay, let's rewind back to the very beginning. How was Barosaurus actually discovered? Who found the first bone?
The story starts in South Dakota back in 1889. The very first remains, just six-tailed vertebrae, were found by Isabella R. Ellerman. She was actually the local postmistress.
The postmistress found them. That's amazing.
Isn't it? These bones were then properly excavated by the famous paleontologists Othniel Charles Marsh and John Bell Hatcher, who were working for Yale at the time.
And those 6 bones were enough to name a whole new dinosaur.
They were. That set of vertebrae, YPM 429, became the type specimen. Marsh looked at them and named the species Barosaurus lentus. Heavy lizard, as we said, and lentus is Latin for slow.
Heavy, slow lizard.
Reflecting the thinking at the time, yeah. Apparently the rest of the skeleton might have been there, but they didn't collect it then.
Slow.
Oh.
It's funny how our views change. How did the classification evolve after that initial find? Did Marsh stick with slow lizard?
Well, his classification shifted a bit. First, he put it in a family called Atlantosauridae, kind of a mixed bag back then. But by 1898, looking closer, he realized it was much more like the Diplodocids.
So he recognized the connection to Diplodocus fairly early on.
He did. And interestingly, just before he died, he actually named a second species, Barosaurus affinis, based on some smaller foot bones found by George Wayland.
A second species. Does that still stand?
Not really. Most scientists now think B. affinis was probably just a younger or smaller B. lentus, so we call it a junior synonym. Just one species, Barosaurus lentus, is generally accepted today.
Okay, one species. What about later finds? The Carnegie Quarry in Utah sounds like it was crucial.
Absolutely pivotal. In 1912, the great fossil hunter Earl Douglas, working for the Carnegie Museum, found 4 incredibly long neck vertebrae there, a meter each. Near a Diplodocus.
Near a Diplodocus. So were they confused at first?
They were. It wasn't immediately clear these long bones belonged to a different dinosaur. It took a few years and some detective work.
How did they figure it out?
Well, back at Yale, the original Barosaurus tailbones were finally being properly studied and described in detail by Richard Swan Lull in 1919. Based on Lull's detailed description, William Jacob Holland, the director at the Carnegie Museum, realized, aha, these super long neck bones found by Douglas must be Barosaurus. He also linked another partial skeleton found by Douglas in 1918 to Barosaurus. Part of that one is actually still in the cliff face at Dinosaur National Monument.
Still in the rock.
Yeah.
Amazing. It really is like a long, slow puzzle. And then came the most complete specimen, the one in New York.
That's the one. Found in 1923, also by Earl Douglas at the Carnegie Quarry, but this time working for the University of Utah. This was the best one yet.
The AMNH specimen.
Right, AMNH 6341. But initially, its bones got scattered. Some went to Utah, some to the Smithsonian in D.C., some even back to the Carnegie in Pittsburgh.
What a mess. How did they end up together in New York?
Thankfully, the legendary Barnum Brown of T-Rex fame stepped in around 1929. He arranged for all the pieces to be brought together at the American Museum of Natural History.
Good old Barnum Brown.
And that's the specimen they used to create that incredible rearing mount in the museum lobby. You know the one. Defending a smaller dinosaur.
Oh, yeah. The iconic one.
Yeah.
But you said the smaller dinosaur isn't actually a baby Barosaurus.
Well, the current thinking is that the smaller skeleton in that display is actually a different related dinosaur called Catodocus. So the scene is dramatic, maybe not entirely accurate scientifically today, but still breathtaking.
It certainly makes an impression. Have there been other important finds more recently?
Yes, some more vertebrae and even a pelvis turned up back in South Dakota near where the first bones were found. That material is now at the South Dakota School of Mines. Helps fill in more details.
Yeah, we have to mention Gordo in Toronto, right? The big Canadian mount.
Absolutely. Gordo at the Royal Ontario Museum, that's a fantastic skeleton, about 40% complete. It's the biggest mounted dinosaur in Canada, nearly 27.5 meters long.
Also from the Carnegie quarry? Douglas again.
Yep, found by Douglas early on, but the ROM acquired it much later, in the 60s. It sat in storage for ages before they finally mounted it.
And no skull for Gordo either.
No Barosaurus skull has ever been found, remember. So Gordo's mount uses a Diplodocus skull cast as a stand-in. Common practice when you have incomplete fossils. What's cool about the Gordo mount is how it's built. Each bone has its own support, so researchers can easily study them.
Clever design.
And there might even be more Gordo bones in storage at the ROM. Some paleontologists even think Gordo might be the same individual as those first long neck bones found for the Carnegie Museum way back when. It's all connected.
Incredible how these finds link up over time and across museums. So, our understanding has definitely evolved. Were there any big misconceptions about Barosaurus in the past? Things popular books got wrong?
Oh, definitely. Darren Naish has written about this. For a while, especially in the late 20th century, a lot of books and art showed Barosaurus incorrectly.
How?
They often gave it a really short tail, kind of a bulky brachiosaur-like body, sometimes wrinkly skin folds on the neck, even a weird U-shaped curve in the upper neck.
A U-shaped neck? That doesn't sound right.
It wasn't. It became this kind of paleort meme, as Naish called it. Probably traced back to one inaccurate drawing from 1968 that just got copied over and over.
So the image of the long, sweeping neck and shorter tail took a while to become standard.
Exactly. Our current picture, based on the actual fossils, is quite different from some of those older popular depictions.
Which brings us to how it actually lived. What can the bones tell us about its behavior, its life, its paleobiology?
Well, the neck vertebrae are key here. Studying how they fit together suggests the neck was really flexible side to side.
Okay, good lateral movement.
But maybe not so much up and down. Limited vertical flexibility.
Really? So it couldn't reach high into trees easily?
Probably not as easily as some other sauropods. This strongly suggests it was more of a low browser, sweeping that long neck in wide arcs near the ground to eat low-growing vegetation. That idea was first really pushed by John Martin back in the 80s.
Like a giant vacuum cleaner for ferns and cycads?
Kind of, yeah, covering a huge area without moving its body much. Very efficient for a massive animal.
Makes sense. And its environment, the Morrison Formation, what's that world like 150 million years ago?
We touched on it, a vast floodplain next to the shrinking Sundance Sea. Tectonic uplift to the west was shedding sediment. The climate was different, too.
Warmer.
Definitely warmer. Much higher CO2 levels globally back then. So probably warm winters, hot summers, maybe seasonally dry, a semi-arid landscape overall, but with rivers and floodplains supporting lots of life.
And who else lived there? Who were Barosaurus's neighbors?
Oh, it was a spectacular ecosystem. You had other giant sauropods walking around, Camarasaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, real giants.
A lot of competition for food, maybe?
Possibly niche partitioning, different feeding strategies. Then you had plant-eating ornithischians like Camptosaurus, Dryosaurus, the famous Stegosaurus with its plates, smaller ones like Ocnelosaurus.
And the predators?
Big ones. Allosaurus was everywhere, the most common large theropod. But you also had potentially even bigger ones like Saurophaganax plus Torvosaurus, Ceratosaurus. A dangerous place to be, even if you were huge.
Truly a land of giants. What about non-dinosaur life?
Loads of other stuff. Fish in the rivers, amphibians like frogs and salamanders, turtles, lizard-like reptiles, early croc relatives, pterosaurs flying overhead, and early mammals, probably small, scurrying around underfoot.
And the plants? What was Barosaurus actually eating?
The flora was rich, too. Fossil evidence shows algae, fungi, mosses, horsetails, lots of ferns, cycads, ginkgos, and various conifers. Probably lush vegetation near water sources, grading into more open fern savannas away from the rivers. Barosaurus was likely munching on those ferns and cycads near the ground.
It paints an incredible picture. So finally, back to that neck.
Yeah.
That 10-meter-plus neck. Besides low browsing, any other ideas about why it got so incredibly long?
It's likely multifunctional. Efficient feeding is probably number one. But some scientists think the huge surface area could have helped radiate excess body heat, like giant elephant ears, helping it stay cool in that warm climate.
Thermoregulation. Okay.
Yeah. And you can't rule out sexual selection. Maybe longer, more impressive necks were attractive to mates. Like a peacock's tail, but much bigger. David Evans has suggested this possibility.
Display, feeding, cooling, maybe all of the above. It's fascinating. So let's wrap this up. Barosaurus, the heavy lizard, was truly immense, possibly one of the longest ever, defined by that incredible neck, adapted for low browsing in a rich Jurassic world. and we're still learning more all the time.
Absolutely. The discovery history, the ongoing debates, the sheer scale, it's captivating. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? Considering that long neck and limited vertical reach, what other unique roles did it play? Did its specific way of feeding actually shape the plant life around it in ways we haven't fully grasped yet?
That's a great thought to leave with. How did this giant architect its own environment? Definitely something to ponder.